The Shah animal. Disclaimer, I'm not an Egyptologist, sadly, but Kemet is half of my longest special interest, and I'm writing much of this from memory, as my cognitive impairment led to me effectively abandoning learning more, and this is my theory. So this is my dude, Setekh or Setekh, and yes, I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly, anglicized as Seth and Seth. As you can see, he's got kind of a weird-shaped head, but maybe he's just a little guy in a little goofy, silly mood, right? As many already know, the ancient Egyptians dual represented a lot of their gods with the heads of the gods' animal natures, why a lot of people refer to them as the first furries. To make a long story, approximately 3,000 years long, short, he represented good chaos like that of storms and fires, things that were ultimately beneficial in the end. A bit like Loki's antics. And later, the way he was seen was changed to be evil. Just evil. So instead of killing the actual evil chaos representation every night, Apophis, and protecting Ra and thusly the world from unimaginable tragedy and ruled over Lower Egypt with his falcon brother counterpart, Heru or Horus the Elder, as the other pharaoh, he killed his brother, Wasir or Osiris, and fought his falcon nephew, Heru or Horus, for the kingdom. Among all the real animals he was associated with or depicted as, there was this funky-looking little guy that looked like a greyhound, which Egypt essentially created, with a downturned nose, upside-down triangular ears, and a stiff, forked tail. And that's weird, because what the hell was this? A jackal aardvark thing? There was no known animal actually like that, so was it like Amut, a crocodile, lion, leopard, hippo? But with her, the mashup was so obvious, almost insulting to miss. She was a chimera of dangerous creatures and a representation of the punishment of what being a sinner was. That was different to the Shah. But maybe they were long-extinct animals forever belonging to that ancient world. I don't think so, at least not for Amut, as she's a clear chimera like the Japanese dragon with oxen ears and wolf fangs, etc. Besides, a croc-faced, lion mane, leopard upper body, and hippo rump surely isn't possible. But maybe a Shah could be. It's just so bizarre to me, these mashup creatures in Kemet. Amut is essentially the only one, and an actual god, depicted this way. It also makes sense for her, an amalgamation of the scariest creatures waiting to give your eternal soul demise after your worldly crimes. Even the demons, the non-god or Nijeru, that guarded various places of Dwat or the underworld, were depicted similar to other gods with animal heads. So then why would this other god, who, sure, had gone through a drastic change in roles but had long been associated with that animal, be some sort of discrete chimera? The oldest representation of Setekh or Shah was in a pre-kingdom mace head belonging to Scorpion II of Nakada III. Meanwhile, the oldest representation of Amut wasn't until the 19th or 22nd dynasty of Kemet, which was a great deal later. So Amut was approximately since 1250 BCE, and the Shah or Setekh was approximately from 3100 BCE. That's roughly 2,000 years of predation. And remember, Jesus marks your full zeros in both BC and BCE, so before that counts backwards. So the Stonehenge in Scotland was being constructed around the same year the Shah or Setekh came about, assuming a carving followed shortly after any spoken word traditions of it, and Amut was created around the same time ancient China was creating their chariots. So again, a mashup creature doesn't make sense to me, especially since people in such early periods usually, in my observations, stuck to what they'd actually seen around them. What even is he? Donkey or phallus fish head? Dog body? What's the tail? A snake's tongue? What's with the ears? What could possibly serve as the inspiration for those? And I don't think docking seems viable. And that brings me to my theory about the Shah. I think that taking for granted that it was generally observed, and considering the great many depictions of him even after the turning of his worship center, during which it can be assumed at least some depictions were destroyed as an expression of the people's derangement, it was a real animal, but I don't think it was a canid like a lot of others do. I think it was a marsupial. I actually had this sort of light bulb moment when I was watching a bunch of stuff about the thylacine or Tasmanian tiger, which also evolutionarily converged or attained similar traits as unrelated species to look similar to tigers with the stripes or canids through the rest of its features. It filled the same ecological niche in its marsupial wonderland of Australia as wild dogs until the dingoes were introduced, and together with the human hunting, are now functionally extinct, if a final holdout of them even actually exists. And it makes sense for the Shah to be a marsupial. Stiff tail, weird-looking proportions, and fucked-up-seeming jaw. It's also closely associated with storms and the desert, so I assume it was elusive aside from these times, when either the barometric changes or the promise of unveiled food brought them closer to where they could be visibly captured by humans. And anyone who's passionate about fishing knows that where you find them changes when a storm's coming. And I'm sure everyone's seen birds picking out the worms and bugs from the surface of the ground that were escaping drowning after a rain. So I posit that if it did exist and was a marsupial, it lived in the Sahara, accustomed to the harsh living and probably scared further in by events later in the ancient Egyptian timeline. I wouldn't be surprised and would even assume they were hunted to some degree, maybe to show one's skill or to sacrifice to a god as cats and jackals were to Bast or Bastet and Yinpu or Anubis, respectively. Maybe even after Setekh's nature was changed and Waysir's base grew, they were killed out of fear or plain hatred. Humans are good at that. While I wasn't able to find if there's any evidence of marsupials in that part of the world, it doesn't mean my theory is irrational. The Sahara proper is a wealth of hidden knowledge and evidence, and I really wish I could pull a Loch Ness monster search in regard to the Sahara and Salawa. Oh, that's the modern name for it, the Shah. There's been a couple alleged sightings since antiquity. But is this a foolproof theory? Obviously not. If I could have a foolproof theory, I'd have decent proof, and an actual Egyptologist probably would have already published it, and the common consensus wouldn't be that the Shah is some made-up thing and sort of just office in its own little category, which, king, but still. This theory also relies on what I've mentioned before. Too much trust in the early people's quote-unquote integrity in describing the world around them. It also doesn't account for the cryptids, assigning identity to cryptic, second-long glimpses of creatures not clearly identifiable, or creating entire other things in explanation to creepy encounters or after remnants. And I can't even say I wouldn't believe that because of the reiteration through thousands of years for hundreds of times, but most people are also conscious of the chupacabra, the Yeti, the Bigfoot, feral people, vampires, Sasquatches, werewolves, skinny boys, windy boys, etc. Many cryptids which persist because of humans' imagination, the unreliable nature of memory, and inability to rely on what you can't clearly see despite how unreal it seems. It also doesn't consider the dogs, the Saluki. With such little evidence from these ancient times, courtesy of upheavals, invaders, white people, modern warfare, and the good old weathering and ways of degradation, also the Nile moving 60 miles since then, and hiding everything in heaps and heaps of sand, it's hard to rule out that it wasn't some malformed dog that one guy really liked for some reason, tried selectively breeding it, and it caught on in some way. Or maybe it was a physically altered dog, and there was always some guy to keep it up thereafter. It's really hard to say with any surety, but I maintain my theory. Will we ever find out in whatever counts as surety in archaeological terms? We could, but we'll just have to wait and see.